Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 13-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. You guys also follow me on social media. I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter, CPen16 over on IG, and for more content over on Patreon. It's always much appreciated. You can get into a community of 300 plus people, hop into the Discord chat, and all my extra content that I put out each and every single day or each and every single week depending on the sport. We have a doubleheader for NASCAR this weekend, so pumping out a lot of content for that as well. So if you're interested, like I said, links in the description below. If you're not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. Now, this slate, I gotta be honest, it's tricky, and that's why this video is coming out much later than usual, because I'm just trying to wrap my head around what to do with pitching. I think pitching is very, very confusing today. I mean, the bats, yeah, there's some obvious spots like the Dodgers, the Indians, the Red Sox, yeah, those guys make sense. But the pitching, I mean, it's just a little bit tricky here. We don't have really any SP2s that I'm too comfortable with. We have some cheapish options, which are okay, but they're not the best pitchers in the world. But then we have Putko in a good matchup, but he's just been not that great. Then we have some aces here. Walker Buehler hasn't really looked like himself. Aaron Nola's been on absolute fire. I think he's probably the best pitching option, but it's a little iffy here today. So maybe we double spend up, maybe we don't, but there's a lot of question marks at pitcher today. But we'll start all the way up top with Walker Buehler, 10,200. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball last year. I mean, he had excellent numbers. If you're looking at the 2019 statistics, 3.37 xFIP, near 30% K rate, 5% walk rate, which is overall dominant. This year, he has not been that good. I mean, if I just read his game log to you, 7 points, 7 points, 17, and 8. I mean, it's just not what we'd expect from Walker Buehler. I remember the one game, Buehler had like 16 strikeouts. I think it was versus the Diamondbacks. And, man, he just went. I just remember watching that start because it was like a 2 or 3 game slate. So I was just watching Walker Buehler every single pitch, and the guy was just absolutely brilliant. We have not seen that yet this season, but he's facing the Rockies on the road, which if this was in Coors Field, I wouldn't really have much interest. But since we are at home and the Rockies are a much worse team on the road, and Vegas would tend to agree with that, they only have a 3.5 implied team total. He's got a 68% chance for the win and 6 strikeouts. So Vegas likes him, and I think he's going to be fine here. Now, he's not going to go too deep into the game. We've seen his pitch count at 56, 79, 87, 89. So I think we could probably expect like 90, 95 pitches here, but it is concerning. He's not been amazing. The strikeouts haven't been there either, only at 3, 3, 6, and 5. But I don't mind targeting the Rockies on the road here. I mean, they just obviously fall off a cliff on the road. And if you look at the splits versus righties this season, only a 20% K rate, which is not enticing. 179 team ISO, 89 WRC plus, 323 WOBA. I mean, okay numbers, but I mean, also we've been in Coors Field and it's been a short season so far. So if you just take those onto the road splits, I think they're a team that we can certainly target here. So Walker Buehler's fine. But if you had to pick between the two, I'm going to side with Aaron Nola. He comes in at 9,900, and he's been by far the better pitcher so far this season. I mean, he's been great. If you're looking at his game log, 14 was, but then he had 33, 38, and 32. I mean, he's been on fire the past 3 starts. And now he draws a matchup versus the Braves, which isn't great, but they're also without Acuna and Ozzie Albies, which are 2 of their best hitters. Now, they still have some good bats on their team, but you take those guys out of a lineup, it's going to get a little bit softer, and the strikeouts have been there for him too, 7, 12, 10, and 8. He went over 100 pitches for the first time this season last week, or last start, whenever it was, on 102 pitches, 8 strikeouts versus the Mets. This was on, August 15th, so about a week ago, and I think he's our best option here. I mean, if I had to pick between the two, I'm going to go with Aaron Nola because in recent form, he has been amazing. Vegas likes him, only 4 runs against him. Slight underdog here, 49% chance. But he is going up against Max Fried, who's also an excellent pitcher, and 7 strikeouts in Vegas. Last year's numbers were pretty darn solid. The walks were a little bit of an issue, but we haven't seen the walks be too much of an issue so far this season. They've been at 2, 1, 0, and 1. Nothing I'm really going to be too concerned about. And like I said, the Braves lineup can get a bit watered down without Acuna and Albies, even though they still have some decent bats. But I like Aaron Nola quite a bit here. I guess I would call him the ace of the slate. Could you play both because the pitching's so awful after these two? Sure, you could play Buehler and Nola, and there's plenty of value on this slate to fit it in, so I wouldn't hate it if you did that. I know a lot of people went Kershaw and Shane Bieber last night, and it worked out. They both scored over 30 points, and there was plenty of value bats that did very well. I know Eric Hosmer had the grand slam, and some of the other value bats did very well, so I have no problem at all if you want to double spend up a pitcher because these SP2 options just aren't that great. So I'm going to try to quick hit these guys, but just know I really don't have much confidence in any of them. So we'll start with Adrian Hauser. He comes in 8,400, and this is pretty much just a Vegas and matchup play. Only 3.91 runs for the Pirates on this slate. 56% chance for the win for Hauser, 4.5 strikeouts. Now, if we're looking at Hauser's numbers last season, he was a guy that struggled with lefties, but he was very tough on righties. And I just absolutely love this matchup for Hauser. I mean, if you're looking at the Pirates splits versus righties this season, we just saw Shane Bieber mow them down. Now, I'm not saying Adrian Hauser is even in the same planet as Shane Bieber. I mean, Shane Bieber is just absolutely awesome. It's a treat to watch him pitch every single night. But looking at the Pirates splits versus righties this season, 24.5% K rate. I would assume that probably went up a tick last night after the Bieber game. I'd have to update that still, but 117 ISO, 243 WOBA, and only a 51 WRC plus. I like Hauser quite a bit here. I mean, I think he's a pretty solid SP2 option. I'm not sure if he's going to end up being popular on this slate, but I mean, he's tough on righties. Yeah, he's going to see some lefties, but overall, the Pirates have just been dreadful versus right-handed pitching this season. Vegas doesn't think he's going to get blown up, and his game log this season, it's not amazing, but it's not terrible either. 14 points versus Pittsburgh in his first start, 25 points versus the White Sox, 6 versus Minnesota, but Minnesota's definitely got a lot of power in that lineup, and then 10 versus the Cubs. So I think he's fine. I think he's probably going to be good for like 12 to 18 points here, maybe if he's on his game, so I don't mind Hauser here. The lefties could give him some issues, but I think overall he's a decently safe play. So if you want to go like the Noah Hauser route, I don't mind that. It's not too much at pitching either. And then after Hauser, like I'm not even that confident in Hauser, but I mean these guys are just like kind of like a mixed bag and just you're hoping for the best here. But I'll start with Andrew Heaney. Now I do not like the matchup versus the Oakland Athletics because they are a team that are pretty good versus lefties. Last season, they were one of the better teams in the league versus lefties. They didn't strike out whatsoever. I think like only an 18% K rate last season and over a 200 ISO. If we're looking at the numbers this season versus lefties, they're actually striking out 29% of the time. 316 WOBA, 104 WRC plus, and a 183 ISO. Now this is a smaller sample size, so I don't expect them to keep striking out 29% of the time versus lefties. But that's encouraging to see for Andrew Heaney. Now he is a guy that has some strikeout upside. The only issue with him is that he allows a ton of fly balls, and there is quite a bit of power on this A's team. So this is a very high risk, high reward matchup for Andrew Heaney. The strikeout upside is there, but the power downside for him is there as well. I mean, he could very easily get blown up. But, I mean, he really hasn't this season. If we're looking at his game log, 19, 15, 16, 1 versus the Rangers, that was his worst game. Then 11 versus the Dodgers, and his first start of the season was against this A's team, and he scored 19 points and struck out 6 in only 67 pitches. And we just saw recently his pitch count go up to 101, so it looks like he's fully stretched out now. So Andrew Heaney, I think he's a fine SP2 option. There is downside here against the A's because they do have some power, especially versus lefties, but they've been striking out quite a bit. So I think Andrew Heaney is firmly in the SP2 category for me on this slate. And then after that, I mean, I keep saying it, but it does get pretty gross. Robbie Ray, I think he's interesting, but he's been pretty awful to start the year. I think he's got like a near 20% walk rate. Because I still have most of the 2019 numbers here posted because it's still a small sample size for these pitchers. Last year at 11% walk rate, we know the thing with Robbie Ray. He can get strikeouts, but he can walk a ton of guys. And when he's off his game, he is a very hittable pitcher. And so far this season, he has been way off of his game. I'll just read you guys the walks that he's had so far this year. So he's at 3, 6, 2, 3, 6. And the strikeouts really haven't been there either. Only at 4, 6, 6, 4, 7. So he's cheap enough where he's interesting in tournaments. I mean, last season he had that 32% K rate, but I will say he has just been dreadful this season. And he has an 8.59 ERA and a near 2 whip. I mean, horrendous numbers. The matchup versus the Giants, it's not terrible, but I wouldn't say it's much as great as it was last season. Last season, you could always use lefties versus the Giants, but they got some decent bats in the lineup, especially versus lefties. Hunter Pence, Donovan Solano. You even got Joey Bart now in the lineup, which I would assume he's going to be pretty popular tonight. You have Wilmer Flores, so I don't think it's like a pushover matchup like it was last season. But Robbie Ray, I mean, at some point the strikeouts are going to be there, so at 7,300, I think he's an okay option, but strictly only in tournaments. I feel much safer with a guy like Hauser and Heaney. Robbie Ray is only a tournament option because I think some of the righties for the Giants actually are playable. And then we have two cheap options. Danny Duffy at 6,700. Now I have some interest in a righty Minnesota stack like Marvin Gonzalez, Nelson Cruz, Jorge Polanco, and some of the other guys. I think they're an interesting stack today, but I also think Duffy is somewhat playable because of the nature of this pitching slate, because there's not a lot of good options here. And Danny Duffy did just get done mowing down this Minnesota lineup. He scored 27 points. He struck out 8 on 84 pitches, only gave up 1 earned run, and he was fine. I mean, 27 points is pretty darn good. Now, the start before that, he faced the same exact Minnesota team, and he only scored 5 points. So it could be a good start. It could be a bad start. Personally, I kind of like these righty Minnesota bats like Sono, Cruz, those kind of guys. I think they can certainly give him some trouble. But the price tag is actually okay, and Danny Duffy's strikeouts have been up this season. Last year, they weren't that high. I think they were only at 21%. But if you're looking at strikeout numbers, he's at 8, 4, 6, 8, 2 in his first start versus Cleveland, but they're not a team that strikes out a ton for the most part. So I think Duffy's interesting. He's had 3 decent games this year at 16, 19, 27, then a 7 and a 5. But at 6,700, do I think he's going to get out of here with 0 runs and 10 strikeouts? Absolutely not. I think Cruz, Sano can certainly take him deep, but if he can get 5-ish strikeouts, maybe a little bit more, only give up 2 to 3 runs, I think he's going to be viable at 6,700. And if you're looking at the Twins' numbers versus lefties this season, to pull it up, they're only striking out 19% of the time, but they only have a 126 team ISO, 302 and a 90 WRC plus. So they've been a better team versus right-handed pitching. So I think Duffy is somewhat interesting at this price tag. And then if you need a punt option, which I guess he's not technically a punt option because he's not in the 4K range, but at 6,300, I think he's the cheapest viable pitcher on this slate. And it's basically just a matchup play. Because Plutko is not good. Like, I'm an Indians fan, but I can admit that Plutko is just not that great of a pitcher. But anytime a righty is facing Detroit, I think they are somewhat playable, and that would be the case here for Plutko. If we're looking at his numbers this season, he scored 18, 3, 8, and then -1 versus this exact same Detroit team. But, I mean, at 6,300, the pitching slate is so bad. So if there's much better pitchers on this slate, I don't think Plutko's even in consideration. But Detroit's just been so awful versus righties this season. Looking at their splits, they're striking out nearly 30% of the time, 170 team ISO and only a 75 WRC plus, and a 281 WOBA. So I think it's just basically a matchup play here. And with the pitching being pretty weak on this slate, I think you could get away with it if you only get you like 5 to 10 points. But I'm not expecting much from Plutko, but he can get the occasional good game. We saw in his first start of the season versus the White Sox, he did score 18 in 6 innings and saw his pitch count up to 86. So if he doesn't get blown up here, which I don't think he's going to get blown up, I think he'll be an okay option at 6,300. I just wish he was a little bit cheaper just to make it a little bit more interesting because 6,300 for Plutko just doesn't feel the greatest. But if he can go 5 innings, I think there's a good chance he can get a win. 4 implied team total for Detroit, not that high, and 61% chance for the win. So Plutko is a little interesting there, but I think that's all for the pitching. I don't really want to go too much in depth on these guys because I'm just not a big fan of the pitching on this slate. So we'll move on to the bats. And we'll start with Chance Sisco at catcher. He did not make the lineup yesterday, which was unfortunate because I liked him quite a bit. But I just ended up playing Austin Barnes. I almost played Joey Bart, but they scored the same amount of points. So it didn't matter. But Chance Sisco, as long as he's back in the lineup, he should be hitting leadoff here versus the righty. And I like this game a lot for fantasy purposes. This Baltimore-Boston game, it's one of the highest totals on the slate for the over-under. I think Boston's right above 5. If I can find one of their bats here. Yeah, Boston's at 5.06, and the Orioles are at 4.94, so that's about 10. So I think you can target both teams on this slate. I do like Chance Sisco versus righties. Looking at his numbers, he's got over a 200 ISO. And Colton Brewer, he's not the worst pitcher out there, but just overall, this Boston pitching staff has been absolutely horrendous this season, and they tend to give up runs pretty much each and every single day. So I don't mind using the Orioles on this slate, but I do prefer using the Red Sox bats. But Orioles wouldn't rule them out, and I like Chance Sisco as long as he's leading off. And then we have probably the chalk option here in Joey Bart at 2,300. I said Robbie Ray's interesting in tournaments, but I also think the Giants stack's interesting in tournaments because Robbie Ray's he's pretty much going to be hit or miss here. For the most part, he's been a big miss this season. So if that trend continues, you can definitely use these Giants, but I don't really have any listed. But I do like Joey Bart, 2,300. He was mega chalk last night because he did get called up, and I would expect him to be pretty chalky again at a lower price tag. And there's just not that many punt catchers I liked on this slate, so I think it makes sense just to plug in Bart here and move on. Only 2,300, and we can certainly use him versus a lefty, so he is certainly in play here, and I'd imagine this is where most people end up going. Dropping down to first base, we have Miguel Sono at 4,700. I said Duffy is interesting today because of the price tag, but I'm going to give the advantage here to the power righties on Minnesota. Miguel Sono obviously crushes left-handed pitching with a 367 ISO, 157 WRC plus, a 651 slugging, a big fly ball tendency to lefties, and he does strike out a lot, but we can definitely use these righties versus Danny Duffy. He does give more power to that side of the plate. Then Shohei Ohtani, 4,500. I think the Angels are pretty interesting on this slate. Mike Fiers is not a big strikeout guy. He's a big strike thrower, and he can certainly give up power to both sides of the plate. Now, he actually gave up more power to righties last season if you're looking at his splits, which I'll show you. 17% and 16% to both sides of the plate here. 143 ISO given up to lefties, but a 187 ISO given up to righties. But I think both sides of the plate are in play here, and I think the Angels are actually a decent GPP stack. They have an implied team total of 5.11, which is actually higher than I thought it was at first. I thought it was around 4.8 or something. So 5.11, there's actually some decent value on the Angels today. And then Carlos Santana, 4,400. The Indians check in as one of the best stacks on the entire slate. I believe they're right below the Dodgers for the highest implied team total. But they're at 5.35 right now. They're going to be against Michael Fulmer and then whoever follows him in the Detroit bullpen. It could be Garcia, but either way, not scared of anyone in the Detroit bullpen. This is a pretty weak squad overall, and I think the Indians should be able to smash here. And the Indians tend to have a tendency to beat up on Detroit pitching for the most part. So I like Cleveland quite a bit here. They're also back at home, which it's much better hitting at home than it is in Detroit or PNC like they have been the past couple of days. So I always like the Indians at home. They tend to play well there, and I know there's no fans, but it's a decent park for hitting, especially for the lefties here. And I like Carlos Santana. He's been swinging a hot bat, and Fulmer's not someone I'm going to be scared of. Neither is the Detroit bullpen, and he's fine versus both sides of the plate. And he's going to be hitting cleanup on one of the top offenses on the slate. So definitely like Carlos Santana. Then Justin Smoke here at 3,300. I think he's a really good cheap option. And I also have Stephen Brault pitching for the Pirates, which is not correct. So let me fix that. Okay, it's Chad Kuhl. Sorry, it feeds that information in from Fangraphs, and sometimes it mixes it up on certain days. So it is Chad Kuhl pitching for the Pirates, and he's a guy that pretty much struggles with lefties, and I think we can certainly look at Justin Smoke here. He's only 3,300, batting cleanup, and I think the Brewers are actually a decent stack on the slate. Chad Kuhl's not someone I'm going to be too scared of here. Now, their team total is only at 4.6, but I think we can definitely target some lefties here. I wouldn't even be scared off from the righties either. But Justin Smoke, looking at his splits versus righties last season, a 234 ISO, 108 WRC plus. Now, very, very low batting average at 202 and a decently high strikeout rate. But I definitely think he's an interesting option here. We're not getting any splits from last year for Chad Kuhl, but I think Justin Smoke at 3,300 is a pretty fine option. I believe he homered last night as well. Then dropping down to second base, he's also eligible at first base. And I actually think 3 out of 4 of these guys at second base are eligible at first. So plenty of options at first base today. I have a couple of guys I didn't even list, like Eric Hosmer, who I think is somewhat interesting. But Max Muncy, 5,200. The Dodgers check in as one of the best plays on the slate. Now, they're not in Coors Field, which if they were in Coors Field, I mean, we would just absolutely be loading up these Dodgers. I remember last year or 2 years ago, when the Dodgers were in Coors Field, it was just like bombs away every single slate. But John Gray, I respect him as a pitcher. He's fine, but he is a guy that I do prefer lefties against. And if you're looking at Gray's splits last season, 185 ISO to lefties, a 345 WOBA, a double-digit walk rate, and a 22% K rate. His numbers versus righties are pretty stingy. I mean, a 25% K rate, 5% walk rate, 53% ground ball rate. So I like the lefties here, but fortunate for the Dodgers, most of their best players are lefties for the most part, besides Mookie Betts and Justin Turner and a couple of other guys. But they have a lot of good lefties here. Cody Bellinger, Max Muncy, Corey Seager, Jock Peterson even, and a couple of other guys I'm forgetting off the top of my head. So definitely like these Dodgers lefties on this slate, and Muncy's great versus either side of the plate. And then Cesar Hernandez, 4,500, should be leading off here for the Indians. Not should, he will be leading off for the Indians. And Michael Fulmer, the Detroit bullpen, does not scare me whatsoever. One of the best teams on the entire slate. And anytime I can recommend the Indians, I will do so because I'm a big Indians fan. But Hernandez, he's a better hitter versus right-handed pitching. And look, he's going to be leading off for one of the top offenses on the slate. I don't think I got to go too more in depth than that. Tommy La Stella, 4,300. So Mike Fiers is not a big strikeout pitcher, and Tommy La Stella doesn't really strike out whatsoever. If you're looking at his numbers, only an 8% K rate to lefties and an 8% K rate to righties. He's got excellent plate discipline, and he's got a high batting average last season, 265 to lefties and 306 to righties. And I think he's an excellent option here. He's going to be hitting near the top of the order. He's sandwiched right in between a lot of good hitters, and I like the Angels quite a bit on this slate. I mean, Mike Fiers does not really scare me too much. Fiers did struggle in his last start versus the Angels. I think he gave up 4 to 5 runs. So La Stella at 4,300. I mean, he's going to make contact here, and I think he's a fine option. I like La Stella at 4,300. Wish he was a little bit cheaper, but I guess that's just getting a little bit too greedy. Then we have another Boston bat here in Michael Chavis. Or did I say another? I don't think I've even talked about a Boston bat yet. I think that's when I talked about Cisco. But Michael Chavis here at 3,700. He's going to be against the lefty and John Means. He's always playable versus lefties, and he's actually been playing pretty well recently. 255 ISO to lefties, only a 261 on base percentage. But we're just pretty much hunting out a cheap home run here. And John Means, He's pretty tough on lefties, but he did struggle versus the righties last season with a near 200 ISO given up and a 17% K rate and a lot of fly balls and hard contact as well. So I like the righties here for Boston, and I think they are certainly playable. Then dropping down to third base, we have Jose Ramirez at 5,400. Look, the Indians are one of the top stacks in the entire slate, so I pretty much have every Indians player that I can listed here. And JRM, obviously one of the best offensive players in baseball at times. I mean, he can be a streaky guy, he'd go on big cold streaks, and then when he's hot, I mean, he's one of the best players in the league, and he's certainly one of the top options on the Indians. He's good versus lefties and versus righties, and I just like all the Indians bats here for the most part. Then Rafael Devers at 5,200. So I don't love the lefty on lefty matchup here, but if you're full stacking Boston, I think he'll go under owned because Means was tougher versus lefties and Devers is worse versus lefties. But they'll get to the bullpen at some point, and I think Devers can certainly launch a ball versus a right-handed pitcher in the bullpen for the Orioles, one of the worst bullpens in the entire league. Although if you look at their bullpen numbers this season, I think their xFIP's sitting at like around 3.8, which isn't bad, but I think over the course of the season that will end up getting worse because you can certainly target that bullpen for sure. And then if you need a couple of cheaper options here, we have Marvin Gonzalez, who's also eligible at second base, which I think that's just recent. He was eligible at first and third, now it's second and third. But 3,700, I think he's a fine option. He's actually a better hitter versus lefties, and especially if he's hitting second, I think he's going to grade out as a pretty good value here. And a 300 batting average to lefties last season, and I prefer the righties here versus Danny Duffy. Team totals at 4.86, which is decently high. I wish it would be above 5, but I still think they're a decent option here on this slate. Just to get the guaranteed ninth inning at bat since they are on the road. Then Matt Carpenter, 3,600, going to be hitting cleanup here versus Anthony Desclafani. Desclafani in his last start was an absolute punching bag versus the Pirates, which is insane because the Pirates have been the worst team in the league versus right-handed pitching this season. But he gave up 9 runs and just got absolutely hammered. Now, I don't think he's going to be that bad all season long, obviously. I mean, he had a couple of good starts before that, but he's a guy that will struggle with lefties. If you're looking at Desclafani's splits here versus lefties, a 218 ISO, 22% K rate, 10% walk rate, 332 WOBA, and a lot of fly balls. Versus righties, he's a whole different story. I mean, he was elite versus them. 151 ISO, 25% K rate, only a 3% walk rate. Great versus righties, but he will struggle with lefties, so I think guys like Colton Wong are also eligible to be in play today. He's at second base, so you could look at him as well. I just want to list the entire slate here in the sheet because that would take too long. But Matt Carpenter's fine. I mean, he's got some okay splits versus righties. He strikes out a ton, but he's actually fine versus both sides of the plate. Frankie Lindor, just another Indians bat. They're pretty expensive. I'd probably more end up playing these cheaper options like Cesar Hernandez, Carlos Santana, Franmil Reyes, Tyler Naquin. But if you're full stack in the Indians and you got the money for it, definitely like Lindor and Jose Ramirez. I mean, they're the two best bats on the team, and obviously they got great numbers versus right-handed pitching. Then Xander Bogaerts, 5,100, like the Red Sox quite a bit. I'm surprised their team total is not a little bit higher, but they have been pretty awful to start the season, so I totally get it. But Xander Bogaerts is pretty good versus left-handed pitching, a 261 ISO, 130 WRC+, 552 slugging, 291 batting average, obviously good numbers all around, and I do like the righties versus John Means compared to the lefties, so I like Xander Bogaerts. Then Corey Seager, I got 3 expensive shortstop. So this could be a spend-up position for me. I don't really want to play Adrianza. If I have to, I guess I will, but there wasn't many value options at shortstop I like. So I'm probably going to end up trying to spend up at shortstop because there's plenty of value in the outfield. There's usually value at first base, catcher, second base. So it looks like third base and shortstop could be the spend-up options spend-up positions for me, but we'll see. Things could change. Because there's a couple of outfielders I like as well. So we'll try to see what happens. But like Corey Seager, he's been very good to start the season. And I really do like the lefties here versus John Gray. Corey Seager's got good numbers versus righties, a low strikeout rate, decent amount of power, good batting average, all that jazz. So like Corey Seager and all the lefties do grade out very well versus John Gray, who does have worse splits versus them. Jorge Polanco, I prefer him versus right-handed pitching, but he should be leading off here versus the lefty, and he's got fine numbers. It's not like I'd fade him versus the lefty. He's still a 270 batting average, just a little bit less power, but don't mind the righties here on the Twins, and I like the price we get with Polanco. Then if you want a cheaper option, you can go with Ahiri Adrianza, I believe that's how you say his name, but he's only 2,800, should be batting in the middle of the order to the back end, probably around 5th, 6th here, maybe 7th, but Adrianza's fine. If you're looking at his splits versus lefties, they're better than they are versus righties. 154 ISO, 270 batting average, 350 on base percentage, 105 WRC+. That's really not that bad. So I actually think he's an interesting option at only 2,800. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have the best player in baseball, Mike Trout, 6,200. I think the Angels are a pretty decent stack on this slate, and this is actually a double reverse splits matchup. We have Mike Trout going up against a righty who he crushes righties with a 379 ISO, 188 WRC plus, 682 slugging, and it's Mike Trout. I don't need to go too in-depth there. I think you guys get the idea. He is the best player in baseball. And then Mike Fiers gave up a little bit more power to righties last season. And now, I'm not someone that uses BVP for anything, but I do believe he has 5 home runs off of Mike Fiers in his career. So if you guys like BVP, I'm pretty sure Mike Trout's got some good history versus him, so it's another boost for him as well. JD Martinez and Nelson Cruz, we got two of the best lefty smashers in the entire league facing lefties, so they're going to grade out as very good plays here. JD, I mean, look, he crushed lefties last season, over a 400 batting average, 482 ISO, 539 WOBA, 494 on base percentage, 242 WRC plus. The numbers are insane. 33% flat ball rate. Well, he never really hit the ball on the ground, only 33%. So I like JD Martinez a lot, especially if you're stacking Boston. Wish he was a little bit cheaper though. He's really expensive. The Nelson Cruz 5,700. Again, similar reasons to JD Martinez here. They're pretty much the same thing, although JD was better versus lefties, but Cruz just seems to get better with age, and Nelson Cruz and JD Martinez are one of the 2 best home run calls in the entire slate. 783 slugging to lefties. I mean, I don't have to read these numbers to you guys. You guys get the idea. Then Christian Yelich 5,100. You get a bit of a discount with him, and I actually like him a lot here versus Chad Cole. He's a guy that does struggle with lefties, and Yelich is fantastic versus righties. He's kind of got the same numbers that Cruz and Martinez have versus lefties, so it's pretty much the same thing, just in reverse. 358 batting average. I mean, almost a 20% or almost a 15% walk rate. 377 ISO. Obviously, great numbers here, so I don't mind Yelich at 5,100. Franmil Reyes at 4,600. I mean, he's been hitting the ball pretty well, and he's in this mid-range at around 4,500. So I think Reyes is certainly playable here. Like the Indians stack a lot. He's going to be hitting into the middle of the order. He's got power to both lefties and righties, and the Detroit bullpen and Michael Fulmer do not scare me. So I think you can certainly use Reyes just to round off your Indian stacks. Shohei Ohtani, he's also eligible at first base, but I like the Angels stack here versus Mike Fiers. He's not a big strikeout guy, and Ohtani's got certainly has a lot of power versus right-handed pitching. So I think he is playable, and I do like that the Angels have a team 12 over 5 at the moment. And then if you need more so value options, we have Kevin Pillar and Tyler Naquin in the 3K range. Pillar should be leading off versus the lefty and John Means, and I think he is certainly interesting. Red Sox have a team 12 over 5. They're in Baltimore, which is one of the best hitters park you can be in. You get the guaranteed 9th inning at bats on the road as well. Only an 8% K rate to lefties last season, a 241 ISO. So I like Kevin Pillar. I actually think he's a pretty decent option on today's slate, especially for that price tag. And if you're stacking up Boston, I think he certainly makes some sense. And then just to end this video, we have Tyler Naquin at 3,300. I wish he was a little bit cheaper in that 2K range, but I think he's going to be fine here. He should be betting 6, and I like the Indians quite a bit today. You get the lefty on righty matchup here, and I think all of the Indians are playable here. If you're looking at Naquin's splits versus righties last season, weren't amazing, not a ton of power, but it's still 290 batting average. At 23% K rate's not that high. Versus lefties, he actually had some better numbers versus lefties, but overall, if you're stacking the Indians, Tyler Naquin is a decent value option. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. I do appreciate you watching. If it was helpful, make sure you remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, check out the NASCAR content if you haven't already, if you want to get into it. It's personally my favorite DFS sport. I love baseball, but NASCAR DFS is something I really enjoy doing. So check it out if you haven't, and that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend.